We are live.
Right, we're live. Welcome, folks. We have completely forgotten what day it is, let alone what recording it is for the podcast due to lockdown. But we do know it is the special VE Day podcast from the Brewgooders. And we have a kind of war-related guest with us. So here with us is Calum Laird, former editor of Commando Comic, the long-running comic series from DC Thomson. So welcome, Calum.
Pleased to be here.
It's really good that you could join us because we are what we call ourselves as the League of Beer and Comics, and I do know that you enjoy a beer.
It has been known.
You very kindly managed to get some to us from one of your local brewers, which we'll come to later on. I think Jeff will probably ask you about beer and stuff. He's the beer aficionado between us, and I'm probably more the comics aficionado. So anybody that is watching either live or the recording later on, if they're into British comics, they'll probably know who you are, Calum. Let's face it. And you're a member of a lot of the Facebook groups and frequently comment on, in most amusing ways, on a lot of the groups on British comics, whether it's 2000 AD or Commando or Battle or Warlord or any of those comics. So you took over from people would probably describe as the legendary editor George Lowe, who was a long-time editor at DC Thomson and worked for many years before. And you took over in 2007 that George retired?
Yes, George retired. George retired in 2007, and I worked until 2015. But George had, I think, 20 years as editor, if not 20 years, very close to it. But total service on Commando of 44 years.
Goodness me. And I wondered, were you around at DC Thomson before you became editor? Were you doing other jobs there before?
Oh, yes. I started on Janky magazine in 1979. Wow. 18 months there. Then up to Commando and back down to Etc., back to Blue Jeans, back to Commando, Classic Motorcycling Legends, back to Commando, Syndication, which is probably covered by archives now. From there to the Dandy, and then back up to Commando as editor.
It sounds like there's a pecking order.
I was going to say, you went down to the Dandy and then back up to...
The Dandy was on the second floor. Commando was on the 7th floor.
Okay.
So it's not physical rather than hierarchical.
Interesting that you mentioned the motorcycling one as well, because we do know that you're a bit of a motorcycling fan and are often seen speeding. No, not speeding. I mean, strictly sticking to the speed limits throughout Tayside and Fife.
No, that's me. That's me. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, interestingly enough, we're coming up for Commando's 60th anniversary next year. And you would have been editor at the time of its 50th anniversary. I'm wondering.
That's right. Yeah.
Now, it was probably my limbo years for comics where I wasn't really doing anything, reading comics or anything at that time. What kind of things were happening there? Were there any special events or comics or anything for the 50th anniversary?
Well, the sort of the big thing for the 50th was that we had an exhibition at the National Army Museum of the artwork of Commando. The story behind that was that one of the curators there was a big comics fan. I nearly called him a nerd there, but that's unfair. A guy from Tasmania, of all places, about as far away from Commando HQ as you can get. And he came up and he chose pieces of art and all that sort of stuff. And it was quite a big deal. There was no way we were ever going to get into the Imperial War Museum, but National Army Museum's right up there, and it's just down the road. So that was the main thing. And we followed that up with another exhibition in Aberdeen at the Gordon Highlanders Museum, which, again, it was the curator who really pushed for that, a guy called Jesper Eriksson. who, if you're a real Commando fan, you can find in several copies. I won't say any more than that, largely because I can't remember the numbers. So, I mean, that was the main thing. Or I decided whatever, to reprint the first few issues. In reverse order. And the logic behind that was...
So, wasn't it? It was about the first dozen or so, I think, were reprinted.
Yeah,
is that right?
It was supposed to be the first dozen. It ended up the first 13 because they changed the number of issues we produced every year halfway through that period.
Yeah.
But I started at 13 and worked back. And folk were saying, why are you doing that? And I said, well, because people will twig to it. And they've got more chance of getting number one. Whereas if I'd started with reprinting number one,
of course,
they would have missed it and that would have been the end of it.
Ah, clever. Yeah, okay. That's a clever way of doing it, yeah. So folk managed to get the classic walk or die number one Commando.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. What we did was, George had reprinted them some years before, but they'd all been reballooned and recaptioned and whatnot. And what I did was I went back to the original negatives of the pages and reprinted them as close to the first printing as we could get. Obviously, we had to clean it up a little bit, you know, because negatives get dirty and scratched and pick up rubbish. But the reprints in 2011 are as close as you can get to the reprints from 1961 as we could manage.
Wow, that's quite amazing. Obviously, quite a big job to kind of go in and do that.
It wasn't as big a job as I had anticipated because the negatives had actually been really well stored, so there wasn't too much damage on them.
Well, that's good to know because it's a rarity that things like that do get well stored. I know, having been to the local the archives of our local newspaper, that they're in a terrible state.
Well, Thompson's, as most people know, have got a large archive department, a large archive area, and a lot of the stuff has been very well, if somewhat simply, kept. Other stuff has not been looked after. One of the places that it was in before was infested with pigeons, and you had to wear a mask and gloves before you moved anything for obvious pigeon-related reasons.
Oh boy, yeah. You mentioned the big exhibition, and certainly amongst fans, that's something a lot of fans have said, that there haven't been enough exhibitions of Commando artwork around. It's been commented on it most of the events that I've been to.
I think that's true. I mean, for a lot of years, Thompsons were kind of secretive about what went on in Thompson Towers. I mean, you couldn't bring friends and relatives into the building and things like that. And they were kind of late adopters of what I would call the comics con mentality. They didn't really see what that was about because they were printers and publishers.
Yeah.
And that was it. And we're talking about huge quantities of comics being produced. It was only later that they realised, you know, what all that was about. The other thing was,
it should be quite a common thing with. I mean, I don't know what sort of time frame we're discussing here, but I know obviously famously the BBC were quite crap at like record keeping for a long time as well, and it was just like they were creators rather than collectors, and so didn't see that that element of their output. So obviously that's now where you've got like episodes of Doctor Who that don't exist unless like they're dug out of like the basement of Kenyan radio stations and stuff.
Yeah.
You know,
Thompson's, to be fair to them, most of the places, the departments within Thompson's kept reasonable records. They just never let anything outside.
Okay.
You know, so the archive is full of artwork from 1922, you know, and right up to the present day, filed in its own idiosyncratic way, which a proper professional archivist is now changing. So there's a lot of that. The other thing about promoting a war title can draw you a lot of negative flack. Mm-hmm. And Thompson's had their fingers burnt over the fallout from the Hungerford massacre when the guy went apeshit with an assault rifle. That stopped a lot of things. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that, but you know what I mean. You see, like at that time, there was a Commando annual, which wasn't done in the Commando office, curiously, and that just got spiked because none of the big distributors would touch it for the next year.
Yeah.
So Commando continued almost as a sort of under the radar publication. It wasn't promoted extensively. It wasn't advertised extensively. And I suspect, although this has never been said to me, but I suspect it was for fear of attracting negative comment and having to defend a war title.
I could totally understand that. And just on a kind of similar note, just recently, there was a bit of conversation between fans and writers on Facebook about some of the words that weren't allowed anymore in comics, and particularly in Commando, So kind of famously, we kind of associate Commando with, various, things like, Gott in Himmel, etc., and these types of phrases. And I don't think actually Commando was as big a culprit as many of the other picture libraries and comics at the time. But there was a bit of conversation there about kind of what words were allowed now and which weren't. And I noticed also in the recent reprint of Ramsey's Raiders, the coloured one, that there's a little disclaimer at the start that says, some of the language used here was relevant at the time or was appropriate at the time, but may not be now.
That's interesting because you gave me Ramsey's Raiders to read in preparation for this week evening, and there's nothing that I did recall that disclaimer and thinking, this is going to be interesting, and not really finding anything. It would be interesting to see where they thought the line had been.
Yeah, I didn't particularly notice anything either, and as somebody who reads Commando every fortnight, I didn't see anything untoward in that at all.
Yeah, obviously just covering bases, maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say it's possibly a catch-all, just in case there's something that somebody else sees that they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, going back to the talking about the reprinting the first 13, there wasn't a huge amount I felt had to be changed, and I was backed up by Scott Montgomery, who was my right-hand man at the time, and Scott tended to be more alert to these things than I was. But we really found very little, certainly within the panels and captions, that we had to change. Some of the dialogue it's just a bit too near the knuckle. It's probably
example.
It's probably authentic. It's probably authentic to what would have been said at the time.
Yeah.
But now it's not got that context, so you have to be careful. I did take the N word out.
Yeah, I did notice that in Ramsey's Raiders. Just the I assumed it was an artistic or a sort of an agreed action, but yeah, they're not overly negative. I found a lot of the characters are not overly negative about the Germans they're facing. They just they talk about the Jerrys a wee bit, but then that's about as close to the bone as you get with it. They're just one of the things I find quite interesting, as somebody that doesn't admittedly read that much Commando, unless Colin lends me something to look at, is there was, I don't know if this is a recent thing or something that's always been prevalent within the stories, is there's a lot of respect for their enemies. Like, I found that quite interesting. There was kind of like, I don't know, there's almost like two ways of writing about the Germans, either with tremendous respect, like they are our enemy, but they are just like us in many respects, or they're faceless. Like you don't. It's almost like you just don't. They're there, and there's something we're shooting at, but they're not part of the. They're not. They're almost. They're a background subplot rather than actual anything worth.
Yeah, they're almost a MacGuffin.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair comment, actually. A lot of the early stories were written by people who had direct or very close indirect experience of the fighting during the war. And there was a lot of respect for the German soldiers, and that carried over into their narratives, and it's carried over into later narratives. But Commando was never really, to me anyway, about the fighting and the war. It was about the interplay between the characters.
Yeah.
The war itself was always a background to this, if you want to make it, really simple, this morality tale about, debts being settled or, feuds being healed or whatever it happened to be. It was always about the interplay between the characters for me.
Mm.
And I mean, reading some other publications where, there's no such thing as a German, they're all Nazis, and it's dropped in right, left, and centre. It loses its impact.
I think I thought it's quite interesting you refer to it as the N word, like just by the word Nazi just conjures up so much imagery and emotion, and that by introducing that word into a story, you underwrite any kind of particularly if the story needs to address the enemy in any way. The minute you start using words like Nazi or stuff like that, they're automatically kind of demonized.
Yes.
Whether rightly or wrongly, but they're demonized to the point that there isn't really. You cut off a whole narrative stream there, because all of a sudden you have this demonic presence that you can't. You talked about morality tales. You can't address any sort of morality tale in that corner of the story now. You have to, and then I think you cut off so much, which is why I quite like the story that Colin gave me, the Ramsay's Raiders. They don't do that, and there just seems to be a lot of respect for who they're fighting. They're fighting in North Africa, and there seems to be a lot of respect for the tact, the tactile nature and the tactics being used by their enemy. It always comes across like
I know what you mean, because if you just simply have the enemy as the Nazis, and you don't give them any respect as warrior strategists or whatever, then everything becomes very easy, because they're all incompetent fools.
Yeah.
So
they're all evil.
Your heroes don't have to be anything other than just, we're British, so we win.
Yeah.
You need the enemy, the opposition, to be a challenge for the heroes to overcome. And if you just, like you say, if you just write them off as Nazis, incompetent fanatics, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Something I've noticed kind of recently, and I maybe wasn't aware of it at the, earlier in my years of reading Commando, is that they do try and kind of tie in with events. So that, for example, this week there's a couple of stories that happen at the end of the war to tie in, obviously, with VE Day, and I don't know if that's always been the case, but it seems that there's kind of more of that, and that kind of brings me on a little bit to this comic here.
I don't think I've seen that one.
You never seen this one? That's interesting. Yeah. because you signed this for me. So this is a couple of months ago. This one came.
I think you gave me drink to sign that.
And I think I overheard George Lowe talking to somebody saying that you never really leave DC, Thompson, and although you've not been employed in your former job there for about 5 years, suddenly a few months ago this comic drops through my door, and I always go to see who wrote it, and there you are. As for a topical story, and this one actually starts 2 years after the war, after World War II, in a pub. And I thought what was very topical about it was there's a kind of older gentleman in a pub, reading his Daily Mirror, and he gets chatting to somebody else in the bar, and he starts bemoaning some people who are gibbering in their own language at the other end of the bar, which is a kind of comment that I've heard, in pubs that I've been in recent months. And then the person he's talking to goes on to kind of be almost the narrator of the story, telling the story of who exactly those Polish people were that are gibbering in their own language in the bar. And I thought it was a kind of really good way to start the story, and obviously ends up back in the bar as well with this gentleman. Well, in fact, let you tell the story a little bit.
Please do.
As I say, I've never read it before in my life.
Just ghostwriter.
Stan is a Pole, and the story centres around him and his various struggles to be accepted within the British forces, and he ends up as a commando. And on his first raid, he completely fails to come to grips with the Germans, but saves his commanding officer from being killed by throwing him over his shoulder and running for it. As a result, San suffers wounds that means he can't continue in active service, and his commanding officer loses his leg. And this is all told to this older guy in the pub who's been railing about these people gibbering in a foreign language. And will I tell the sting in the tail?
Why not? Why not? Go ahead.
At which point Stan comes over and speaks to the guy who's been narrating this tale to the older guy and says, "How's the leg, Colonel?" And you realise that the guy who's been doing the narration has grown a beard since he was in the story. It's the same guy who was saved, and this is Stan the Commando, who has saved his life and is now drinking in the pub, and is one of the Poles who's been offered British citizenship because they can't return to Poland after the war. And the older guy is somewhat gobsmacked, and it boils down to, well, you can't believe anything you read in the papers, throws his paper in the bin, and the rest of them walk out of the pub off down to football.
Yeah, I thought it was a really incredible story. I really enjoyed it. I liked how it drew partly on kind of modern things, but also from what I know of the Poles that came to Britain during the war, is that they weren't immediately put into battle, even though many of them had experience in Poland, and their battles through Poland, and a lot of them went to France as well and fought with the French alongside the French. Is that they weren't put into the front line or sent on any kind of active service immediately. It's something I've been kind of researching as well. I've got a few Polish people that I know, and it's something that I've been kind of researching. And in your story, Stan kind of does everything he can to get back into the fight when he does eventually, get to Britain. He just constantly wants to get back to it, along with his colleagues, and that's why he ends up joining the Commandos, because that's probably going to give him the best chance of being able to take the fight back. So I really liked that. I thought that was an interesting kind of take on the story.
Well, of course, I'm in Fife as well, and Fife became the second home for so many Poles. Yeah, I mean,
indeed, yeah. Tentsmuir, the big forest at the kind of the dog's ear of Fife, as people might call it, if you look at a map. That area was a huge army camp, mostly tents and log cabins and things that had hastily been built to house a lot of the Polish army. Yeah.
And
how much work are you expected to do in terms of your? Sorry, I might have just totally moving the conversation in the wrong direction.
No.
But I know when I know Colin has done a lot of research in his for his stories, and he often talks about it. How much research are you expected to do as a writer and an editor for Commando to make sure that you're? I know Colin's talked a bit about how he has been approached in parts of his stories where readers have thought that he's maybe got a bit wrong, or he hasn't got his details 100% accurate. You know, is that quite common, or is that?
Oh yeah. There's not been a Commando story written that somebody couldn't have some chib at for being inaccurate in some way, place, or form. So it's not something that anybody should let get them down. It's the nature of the beast. I was lucky because when I started in 81, there was quite a big staff, and we were expected to do quite a lot of research and background reading while we were also working. So there was space within the timetable for us to read War Monthly, any of the reference books, History of World War II, whatever it happened to be. And if we were actually working on a story, we were encouraged to check the details to make sure there was, if not accurate, but certainly authentic as possible. I mean, my stock answer to people who wrote in or emailed in or put it on Facebook, you know, about, oh, you've got the badges on the Russian uniforms in the wrong place. I say, well, did it spoil the story for you? And if the answer to that's no, then it doesn't really matter. But we will try and fix it next time. As an editor, I expected writers, to have a basic grasp of the chronology of the war. I didn't expect to find Harrier jump jets in France in 1940. It's a ridiculous example. But the role of the sub-editors, when I was a sub-editor, rather than when I was an editor, was to weed out all the little mistakes and to make sure that, you know, like, you didn't have a 1945 Spitfire in 1940. You didn't have a World War I rifle, unless there was a compelling story reason for it, being used in 1940, you know, that sort of thing. But no, that's what it's a team effort. The author wants to get it right, and the sub-editing staff are there to help them get it right and just say, oh, we've missed something here, you know. That the first thing, 1981, I go into Commando, I'm there in my first week, and I'm reading the story, and I have to say to the chief sub-editor, there's a problem with this story, and he went, you know, I mean, I'm just freshly minted, and he thinks, what does this guy know about it? I said, well, there's two soldiers looking at the engine of this Volkswagen, and they've got the front of the car open. He said, so? I said, well, the engine's in the back in the Volkswagen. Oh, goodness me, he said.
That's amazing.
Get that down to the art department and get it sorted. So I think I got a bonus point for that.
That's excellent. Jeff, I'm going to reveal something, and I don't think anybody knows this because I've never told anybody this. But when I was writing my war story, Raid on the 4th, I was very lucky to have a certain editor have a quick glance over it, an uncredited editor.
Oh, amazing.
Which was very useful and did pick up a few omissions.
Imagine that you must have seen some kind of doozies. That's quite a good one. I've just finished having. I'm just about to get, like, once we come off the air, I'm literally going to go and get my order in for printing my own comic, my first comic, which my uncredited editor was Colin. So obviously, I'm totally moved that that's. I'm moved that he's learned from the best in uncredited editors.
Well, I learned from the best. I learned from George Lowe.
Oh, so that's amazing. That's some prestige line of editors. I like one of the things that I wrote in my comic that I thought was quite funny. I had two characters going into a tomb with big sticks with like fire in the end, and then they need the story required them to light some oil in an indent in the wall to light up the room. And I'd actually written in the script, "Have you got a match?" And my artist had actually, in the first edit of the artist, who was amazing, and he was amazing. Jordan's great, but he'd actually done so. Like, there's actually a shot in his first draft of the guy holding the torch, looking for matches. I'm like, you're holding a torch with a big fire on it. So obviously the final edit has got him just using what's in his hand to light the indent, but there is this idea of like folk looking for a match using fire to light their pocket to see what they can see.
It could have been left in there for comedic effect.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Right, to let you understand, most Commando books were drawn by non-English speaking artists.
Mm-hmm.
And they would only get the picture description translated, so they didn't know what any of the dialogue was, they didn't know what any of the narration was. And we had to be really careful. This is the sub-editor's job, not the writer's job. The sub-editor's job was to make sure that the right thing was done at the right time. Now, if you get a bunch of guys who've gone into a cave to examine some ammunition that's been dumped there, they'll go in with torches. Now, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But to a Spanish artist or Spanish-speaking artist, a torch is one of these flaming brands that you've just talked about.
Yeah.
Now, that's not a good thing to investigate ammunition with. So
that's funny. My artist is Venezuelan, and it was the exact opposite. So my art Jordan's he's Venezuelan, and I'd written torches, meaning the sticks with the fire, and he'd done
electric flashlights.
Electric flashlights, which then fits into. So I'd asked him to like change them to the sticks with the fire, which when we and Jordan reflected back on it, we're like, well, that's why he would be looking for a match, and it's the whole, it's nuts. That lost in translation thing is really funny though. It's something I enjoyed. Me and Jordan trying to like navigate each other's languages so that the comic book made sense was actually something I wouldn't have realised would have been a part of the process I really enjoyed.
Well, when I went into Commando first, they actually had not a book, but they had a series of photocopied pages of instructions to help the rookie sub-editor get over these problems of the language and everything. And that was one of them. Never say a torch unless you actually mean a torch. Otherwise, say an electric flashlight.
Okay.
There's a whole series of them. And there are stories which, when the artwork came in, the story had to actually be changed because the artist had drawn something which they honestly believed was what we wanted, and it was so totally wrong. And it couldn't really be changed because it was maybe, it would have had to be changed on 10 or 15 pages, and that's not practical, even with an art department that can mock a style. So you have to change the story. I asked for 2 soldiers in the middle of a World War I battle to take cover in a dugout. And for some reason, the artist drew a dugout canoe in the middle of the Somme. And it wasn't the River Somme, it was the middle of the battle. I've no idea why.
Wow.
So
that's really awesome. That's a good story.
I thought you were going to say like they jump into the dugout and it was going to be like the football manager and like the subs were going to be sat there. Like,
you know what? That would have been more understandable.
Right. I do want to kind of get on to chatting about beer, and I think Jeff will maybe chat to you a wee bit about beer. But there is one thing I want to just kind of last thing I want to kind of mention, or maybe get you to tell us a little bit about, because when I introduced you at the start, I did drop your title, Dr. Calum Laird, and I can't believe that. I certainly, when I retire, there's absolutely no chance of me going back to university to do a doctorate. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Right, well, it's like, I don't know if you know the book Yes Man, where
Danny Wallace. Is that
Danny
right?
Wallace. Anytime anybody said, "Will you do this?" he said, "Yes." Right.
Yeah.
Now, I've met Danny a couple of times, and I understand exactly where he was coming from, because he's bonkers, utterly bonkers, in a good way. Well, about 2011, 2012, Chris Murray, who was a doctor then, is now a professor at Dundee University, announced he was going to do a comics master's course. Now, I didn't really know Chris at this time, and he said, I bumped into him, and he said, "Oh, you should do this course." I said, "Oh, Chris, don't be ridiculous." I said, "I left university in 1979, and I didn't even do an arts subject. I did botany." He said, No, you would do it." I said, "Well, all my qualifications are out of date and everything." He said, No, you get in on the basis of your industry experience." And I went, aye, very good. So about less than a week before the course was due to start, he sent me an email. He said, your application's not come through. And I went, that's because I've not sent one. No, you have to apply. You have to apply. And he kind of browbeat me into it. I think he was desperate for numbers, if I'm honest. And so I don't know. Colin maybe knows this better than me, but is it normal to get an application to a university approved in 48 hours?
I've heard of it happening, but it's been a very rare circumstance.
So that was it. So I tried to get Thompson's to pay for it, but they thought it was a vanity project. So I had to pay the fees myself. And much to my surprise, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. It was a top masters with a big chunk of research and everything, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And actually, I did a lot better in that degree than I'd done in my original undergraduate degree, which was quite interesting. But of course, I'd basically been doing the work for 30 years, so I knew what I was talking about.
What was your PhD?
I got my master's, I went to the graduation, all this sort of stuff, and he said, you could probably do a PhD. And I went, look, I've got stuff to do. I'm still working. I said, I've got stuff to do. But anyway, kind of the wee, like an earworm, the song, this thing kept saying, you could do it. So Chris and I put together a proposal for a subject, and the university said, yes, you can do this. So I went back to Thompson's, cap in hand, and said, going to give us some money. And they went, let's think about it. And goodness me, they paid for it. So Mr. Thompson, in his goodness, paid for the 3 years fees for PhD, and I paid the...
What was your research topic, if you don't mind me asking?
For you, Tommy, the war is over.
Oh, okay.
British war comics, 1945 to 85.
Oh, wow.
So I was kind of playing to my strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a while, because in amongst all that, I retired and all that sort of stuff. So in total, it took me about 6 years to finish it, instead of the expected 3. But I got the official notice from the university that I can now call myself doctor. Although COVID has completely scuppered the graduation ceremony, but it might have a trade-off, because Professor Murray has got a whole clutch of comics students now, and it might be that 3 of us go across the stage together to get our doctorates, which should be a good thing for him.
Mm-hmm.
So is that enough detail for you, Colin?
Absolutely. I just thought, boy, I just would not want to go back to uni. But hey, well done. That's all I can say, really. That's awesome.
To be honest, there were times when I thought, what on earth are you doing?
I think you did express that to me once. Yeah.
What on earth are you doing?
You'd have got a wee student card with your 10% off everything, though.
I did.
Yeah.
10%. I think that leads us on nicely to our next segment, because I can just congratulate you on your gaining your doctorate at long last.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. Cheers, boys.
That's brilliant. So I'm drinking, I don't know what you guys, I think, Colin, you're drinking the same as me. So the brewery is Moore. The brewery is a Scottish.
I'm drinking Moorish.
I'm drinking Moorish as well.
I'm drinking Morse code.
Morse code. Yeah.
So Moore beers are based in Broughty Ferry. Moorish is a Caledonian IPA. It was interesting. I hadn't tasted it before Colin said that it reminded him of like a Duker's or that kind of beer, and that's certainly what I get from that. That's a really kind of Scottish ale, isn't it? Like,
I would say so. Yeah, it's as I explained to you earlier. I'll just throw it in. The brewery is in an old cottage, and it's obviously got a sort of like almost like a byre beside it, and that's where the brewery is, and it's just up the road where my mum and dad stay. So I've known of the brewery for quite some time. So that's where that came from. It's under new management now, and they're really going at it hammer and tongs.
You said that you can get them on tap in a couple of places now. Is that right?
Well, you used to be able to get them on tap in a lot of places, but the coronavirus lockdown has kind of stymied things. But I mean, as far as I know, it ranged from the Spittal of Glenshee Hotel down to various places in Edinburgh.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie, there were a brewery that I wasn't familiar with until Colin mentioned them last week. But
yeah, well, I didn't know about them either until Calum had mentioned them to me too, and then surprised to get a wee delivery the other day, which is lovely. Thanks, Calum.
Look, I mean, we're all in unusual times and everything, and just something random coming out of the blue. I thought, oh well, why not? You know, because it helps me, it helps you, and it helps the guys in the brewery. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll absolutely, when this is all done, be up in Dundee and being able to return the favour by taking you out. But
look forward to that.
This has been a really funny experience. I got Mark from Cool Brewing showed up at my door on Saturday with 4 beers. Now, obviously, we did a Matrix special a couple of weeks ago where he said, Source Code, which is one of the Cool's beers. He says, we've currently got it brewing just now. You can't actually buy it just now, unless because there isn't any. But as soon as it's been brewed, I'll make sure that you and Colin get some. And me and Colin get sets. Folks say like stuff like that to us all the time. So me and Colin are like, yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much. But yeah, like on Saturday afternoon, I'm chilling in the garden, and Mark shows up with some beer, and obviously he also knows that I'm a total sucker for like stickers and badges and stuff. So there was stickers in there as well. I was like, this is incredible. And then Colin messages us and he's like, I'll be down there now with some comics and some beer. That the beer was given to us by Calum. I was like, that's incredible. So it's not.
You're looking for the third because everything comes in threes.
Yeah, maybe. I do like So what's more? I use the word gimmick, and Colin makes fun of me quite a lot because no one else uses the word gimmick. But I do quite like the idea that more will stick that in the front of all their names, and then different beers have that different. What does the word more actually mean?
It means big. It's Gaelic for big.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So, like for example, we've got Moorish there. What else have you got there, Colin?
There's Morticia.
I'm a big
darker beer, isn't it? It's a
ruby stout, which I'm really excited about.
Because it's the dark beer, and it's like Morticia from Adam's Family,
or
a Mortician, whatever you want. So the dark follows it. It's not a gimmick. It's what we in the trade call a unique selling point.
A USP. Yeah. Absolutely. I do. It's a good one though. I would totally agree with that idea that Moorish. Like I feel like we kind of glossed over that there, but it's a really nice beer. Just for you can imagine you could sit in a pub and just go for that all night.
Yeah, they're good. They're good session beers. I mean, you go in for a session and you can just drink them steadily and mostly without too many after effects.
Well, that's what Colin was saying. Like earlier, I think a lot of their percentages, their ABVs are all quite low, or at least the ones that you've given us are. So Moorish is 4.2.
Well, that's all of the range that's available at the moment.
Yeah, Morticia's 4.5, so very slightly higher, but it's a beautiful colour. I don't know if my camera does that any favours, but I like that.
It's the same colour as your T-shirt.
Yeah, it's
and mine, curiously.
I like it's a ruby stout, which I don't think I've come across. Have we done a ruby stout yet, Colin?
I don't think we've done one on the podcast. No.
We've done ruby beers, obviously. We've done stouts, but I don't think we've done a ruby stout. It's got a very on the nose. It's got that kind of faint stouty smell. Reminds me of breakfast toast at 71 do actually on the nose.
Oh yeah, another kind of Dundee area.
Another Dundee brewery.
Yeah.
Well, that's really That's really mild. That's lovely. That's
Yeah.
There's nothing total. Breakfast toast is a favourite of mine, and what I really like about it is it's quite bitter. There is a kind of smoky, burnt toast aspect to it, whereas that doesn't have anything like that. That's really smooth. I think Colin, that's a total.
Mm-hmm.
You locked out when you gave me that. That's stunning.
The ones that I've had so far actually quite remind me of the Brewshed's beer. Brewshed is a small one-man brewery down in Lime Kilns or Charleston, one of the two. Anyway, wee village just not far from us in Fife, and they make beers that are kind of very similar to the beers that you would get in any pub. You know, nothing that's totally outstanding. You know, they're not looking to make, you know, something that's has a really strong flavour or anything. They just want something to make stuff that will probably be popular because it's quite similar to what you would drink already.
Yeah, totally.
And that's kind of their philosophy. And I'm kind of getting that from these beers. You know, this is very, very much like Duker's. That's not to its detriment. That's probably to, you know.
I see that Morticia is very similar to, is it Brucehaven that Brewshed do?
I think that's their porter, yeah.
Yeah,
I think not in Morticia, but in the other two, there's quite a citrusy ping to quite a lot of them, but it's not overpowering. It's just that little ping on the top.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah,
that's definitely an interesting brewery. Thanks for giving us the heads up on that one. I think I'm going to recommend them to our local beer shop and say, this is somebody you should get in.
I would buy that because if it was on the shelf, I would buy it regularly. I think
the guys are putting a lot of work into it, and after all this lockdown's finished, they're going to start doing brewing tours. Although, I mean, it won't take very long because the brewery is not big. But one of the things you will be allowed to do is you'll be allowed to take away a bag of compost for your garden, which is the spent hops. They put the spent hops in a huge compost heap and they've been putting them out for 2 years. So some of that stuff's going to be absolutely brilliant.
Well, that's amazing. I went to pick up there's a brewery not very far from my house. Me and Colin went there last year to not very far. It's pretty much halfway between me and Colin's house, Seven Kings in Dunfermline. And they grow hops on site, and not in large enough numbers that they can use it in all their beers. But I think every so often they will put some in the mash tub. But I went to pick up some beer from them on a couple of weeks ago, and all the hop plants were in the car, and it was quite incredible. But that's an amazing beer. There's a lot of breweries do things like that, like compost. I've seen a couple of breweries do as well, like dog treats.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure how it works, but I think it's maybe just like leftover stuff from the mash tun that you can dry, and it becomes like a biscuit, and dogs love them.
Mm.
Yeah, it's not unusual for like distilleries and that to use the leftover bits for stuff. I used to work in a maltings. It was my first job out of school when I was 16. Wasn't even old enough to drink. But I worked in a maltings making malt for the whiskey industry. And all the little bits that came off it, you know, the kind of bits that fell off and the little sprouts that come off the malt when the barley's grown it and malted. Get made into cattle feed, so they get crushed into pellets. And there was 1 year where the pellets were so dry they weren't sticking together, so they didn't want tons of this stuff to go to waste. So they bought a big vat of molasses, and this was in the middle of winter, and the molasses was almost solid. It wouldn't pour. So they got an immersion heater, just like a kettle kind of heater, dropped it in it and left it, and it bubbled and bubbled away. Forgot about it, and this stuff bubbled over across the floor, and then it went down. This was on the upper floor of the building, and the hot molasses went down the wall cavity, and they thought, I can't leave it in there because it'll go off. The rats will come, that will stink, and so they ended up drilling a hole, at ground level, to let this molasses come out into the courtyard. And that's quite an amusing story in itself. But one of the guys that we worked with decided he wasn't going to let this molasses go to waste, so he bought a loaf of bread and put it on his piece for his lunch.
Bit Marmite of it, isn't it? So what are you doing? Have you got anything coming up, Calum? I know. Colin mentioned that you're still writing bits and pieces for Commando, and are you writing for anyone else? Or have you got anything else coming up?
Well, I've written a second story for Commando, and as far as I know, it's been accepted. Put it like this, they've paid for it. So, at the moment, not really doing a great deal, to be honest. This whole thing's kind of thrown me off. But I'd actually quite like to get a publisher for my PhD thesis.
Yeah.
I've let a few people see it, and most people have enjoyed reading, or have said they enjoyed reading it. So it'll be quite good to see whether an academic publisher would pick it up, or whether a more general publisher might pick it up.
You say about War Comics 45 to 85, did you say?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. That must be really interesting. Based on just what you've been saying and how there's a revisionist kind of history that goes on within Commando, where you're editing out certain words that would have been all right back in the time. There's a really cool it's a really interesting social discussion to be had about how stories would develop in that sort of time frame that you've mentioned. It'd be a really cool thesis to read, I imagine.
Well, I set it in context. I started way back with the chapbooks back in the 1700s and brought it right through. And the things that really changed war comics, British war comics, were warlord and battle. Because up until that point, it very much towed the line. They were sort of almost establishment. They were very much flag waving exercises, a lot of them. Partly because a guy called Harmsworth, who was known for the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, was involved in a lot of the comics, and they became imperial recruiting officers. Now, you weren't allowed to criticise. And it wasn't until Warlord started to change things and make it a little bit more edgy, and of course Battle capitalised on that as well, courtesy of Wagner and Mills. So there's a whole thing to be had there, and you can actually see the change in the way war itself, but particularly the treatment of enemies. And it touches on what we were talking about earlier about demonising people by just calling them Nazis.
Yeah.
The honourable enemy was very much the exception rather than the rule. And when you get to something like Charlie's War, Battle, 1970s, the enemy isn't actually the guys in the different coloured uniforms and everything. The enemy is actually within your own ranks. It's the officer class. Yeah. That's very much Pat Mills' stock in trade. But it does start making you think, and it completely changes the war story. So yes, I think it's interesting to read.
I think that's fascinating as well. There's a lot of particularly sort of regular, modern takes on war that recognise the class issue that existed within, particularly like the World War One, the First World War. Sorry, me and my wife Sam watched a lot of Downton Abbey last year. We kind of binged it all. And that's quite a strong recurring story about how certain characters are dead simply because they were lower in the pecking order within social classes. Mm-hmm. There's people that are alive very much because of the sacrifices made by people from like lower classes, for lack of a better term. So,
sorry, Colin will maybe remember Cadman.
Oh yeah,
the fighting coward. Well, Cadman got away with murder because he was the toff, and it was his chauffeur.
Yeah, he's got
it was one of his estates
or something. Yeah.
Who was the sergeant who actually did all the work, and the only reason the sergeant did it was because Cadman had made it plain that if he didn't, he would have the sergeant's father thrown out of his house on the estate. So while it was kind of comedic, a little bit black humour, it was actually at the same time it was exploring that that leverage that the toffs had over the proles. You know, there's quite a few things like that.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose that kind of leads us back around to kind of remembering that it's VE Day tomorrow.
Yes.
And, we will be remembering all of those people tomorrow in very different kind of circumstances from what we would normally do. There's a lot of televised events tomorrow. And I saw that actually Commando today had posted out some VE Day bunting that you can print, some
amazing,
certainly some Ian Kennedy artwork in there that you can download and print if you want to put up some bunting, if you can't get out to buy some, if you want to commemorate in that kind of way. So we're almost an hour, probably a bit more than we expected to be talking for. So can I just say thanks very much, Calum, for joining us tonight?
Yeah, it's been
not at all. And I'm looking forward to our televised night in Dundee after all this is over.
Indeed, we will. Yeah, probably as soon as we can afterwards.
We've been talking about Dundee for a long time, but it would be amazing if you could join us.
Yeah, and there's quite a few people who have said that they wanted to come and join us. So that would be great.
Well, it's the spiritual home of British comics.
Indeed, we've got to do that.
Absolutely.
And some decent beer there as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. In fact, I think for some time, Dundee had more pubs per square mile than almost anywhere else in Scotland.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Surely not.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap up there. Thanks very much again, Calum.
Not at all. Anytime.
We'll see you again sometime.